This demo is going to talk a little bit about the differences between chalk pastels and oil pastels. And I've got a couple of different sizes and things here that we can talk about. And here's another one that's been unwrapped. So technically the chalk pastels come in this smaller square or rectangular type cube, and a lot of times like both of them technically have a wrapper on them. I would highly recommend taking the wrappers off. You can actually use the entire surface of the pastel, and so technically I could like make a really skinny line with the corner, or I could make the little bit thicker line with the part that looks sort of like an eraser edge, if you kind of look at that. And I can also take and make a larger mark like that. One thing to note is technically you're going to get a little bit of a texture going on if you use that whole side. This paper is textured also, which is making that texture more apparent. And what you need to know about the chalk pastels is the chalk pastels are technically chalky. They're kind of dusty. So after you've like marked on the paper, you can rub with your finger. And again, I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to pull it a little bit closer to you so that you can see the fact that there's actually a texture that still shows through. So you're getting a little bit of that paper color that's there and the color of the pastel. You do need to be careful as you're getting the pastels on you. You can actually accidentally leave fingerprints in places if you're not careful. The other reason that I have these other papers here is technically I want you to see like the difference as to what those pastels look like on a different paper. And I'm going to take actually a violet here. I have to actually unwrap it. I'm going to unwrap this violet, and technically I'm going to take an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to actually open that up. And if you notice, I cut away from myself so that hopefully I'm not cutting into my finger. I'm going to actually just cut this again, and I'm going to peel this part off so that I've got more of that pastel to work with. And it does take a little bit of time to get that unwrapped. And it's okay. I accidentally just broke that a little bit, but it's actually okay. Not gonna. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually just use a part of that pastel, and again I'm getting a little bit of the texture of the paper showing through there. But I want you to see it actually looks a little bit different. It's a little bit darker on this other paper. So sometimes the paper choice can affect what you're doing with the pastels, and you kind of have to just experiment. The whole point of these art classes is to experiment with different medias to see how the colors look on different papers, how they react with different papers, and that was just regular chalk pastel on the papers. So in order to show you the differences between the pastels, I'm actually going to use oil pastel down here on the bottom, and I'm going to erase a little bit of the chalk pastel that I put on top here just so that you can see underneath what happens when I use oil pastel. So if I'm going to take a similar color to what I had in that pastel, which was purple. So in order to compare the differences, I'm going to take a similar purple pastel. It's actually a little bit darker than that original one. And again, I can get a really nice thin line, or I could use the side that's more like an eraser. And again, I could peel off this entire pastel to get a whole mark along the whole edge if I wanted to cover a whole area. And I can make it thicker in some areas and thinner in others. And then I'm going to actually just take the same pastel and I'm going to do the same mark on these other papers. And I'm actually going to have to peel this off now if I can find the edge. And here you can see I can get a whole big mark all at once. And same thing with these different papers. You can see there's a little bit of a different coloration going on depending on what color of paper I'm using. So hopefully you can see there, and again I can, rub with the oil pastels. The oil pastels obviously have a little bit of oil in them. The chalk pastels do not, and you can hopefully see the difference. The oil pastels will give you a nicer edge between colors. The chalk pastels will give you a nicer blending of colors, but it's harder to get the edges when you do that.